Hi, welcome back to In the Company of Charity. This is Sister Elizabeth, and I am joined by Sister Liz, as always. How are you doing, Sister Liz?
Very, very good. Very excited for this episode.
I am really excited for this one. This is you speaking with Sister Lisa Laguna, who's the vocation director in the province of Elizabeth Ann Seton in the West. And I, as I was listening to this and having been a vocation director, I realized one thing you really want to say to women and men who are in discernment is to remember that you bring your whole self, the good, bad, and the indifferent. You bring every single part of who you are. You bring your family with you. You bring your friends with you. You just bring your whole self. And sometimes I think we can feel that there are obstacles to religious life that may have been in our past or are a part of who we are that we think, oh, they find out this, I'm never going to get in. And then sometimes we think, oh, I'm cool, I'm good, they're going to want me. And you realize, well, maybe this isn't going to be as easy a ride as you think. So I was just really, really excited because I think the topics of this episode are very, they're very deep into the process of discernment and the steps toward acceptance, both accepting your own vocation and understanding it and understanding what you bring to it, but also understanding that the communities that you might be talking to, or the community that you've kind of feel like you've settled on, that is going to be a much deeper look into how that fits together. So I think maybe if you can just run through some of those topics for us, let us know what we're going to be listening to, what we're going to be hearing, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so this is a real deep dive for people into the intricacies of discernment. And so it's the stuff they don't put on posters or in brochures about the things that people might be wondering about vocation. So just in case you want to follow along with what we're gonna be hearing about, the first topic is educational debt. Then we hear about family support, like the motivation of family members and close friends, and responding to our call. The idea that sometimes it might be a no from a particular community and how a vocation director and a person handles that. Issues with certain mental health illnesses or struggles with mental health. And then we have what I would like to call differing life experiences. These are things that people have been through or choices they've made that may be perceived as barriers and whether they are or not. And then the last topic Sister Lisa covers is about discernment and counseling and how often those things go hand in hand in a, can be a very positive way and experience for people. So it really, really is a very in-depth interview with Sister Lisa, and probably will garner a lot of questions, but we are always available to hear any questions that you all might have. You can send your comments and questions to companyofcharity@gmail.com, and just know that we are praying for you, and it's not easy. Discernment is not for the faint of heart, and we've all been there. And so we continue to pray for everybody who's, especially for young people who are in that process for real right at this time. So
yeah, that's a great kind of list, a recap of what folks will hear in this. And so you may think, oh, those aren't relevant to me, but I think as you listen to this episode, you'll see that each of these really brings us into whatever you're discerning, that these are really good conversations to have with a vocation director, with a spiritual director, about where God's calling you, and how, as I said in the beginning, how you bring your whole self, and your whole self is beautiful and wonderful, and just to see how really God's calling you to fit into His world and bring you to your full self. So I hope everyone enjoys the episode. And as Sister Liz said, contact us if you have any questions. We'd be happy to guide you in the right direction for the answers. So enjoy, everyone.
I am here. Welcome back to the podcast. Sister Lisa Laguna, everybody.
Hi there.
Hey. Now, some of you might remember her from such podcast episodes as the one she was on before. So go back and listen to that one.
Please.
We are happy that you're back.
Thank you.
It's a great gift to have you because you have been a vocation director for many years. And so today's topic is the frequently asked questions, the FAQs of vocation work, discernment, people thinking about consecrated life, religious life, priesthood, et cetera, et cetera. And so we wanted to tackle some of those questions that are tough, perhaps, and the things that people are struggling with that maybe seem like barriers or perhaps are barriers to folks entering. So initial thoughts before we dive in to certain things.
Yeah, just, piece of cake. Not. Yeah, I think my initial thoughts are, and we were talking a little bit about this earlier, are that is that first of all, people feel like they should be discerning. Discern. Don't. Sometimes I think we can believe that any obstacle or something that feels like an obstacle is a reason not to discern. So don't let perceived obstacles stand in the way of discerning what feels like a call from God, because discernment either way is a good thing. It's a great thing. Discerning with other holy people can only lead to holy places. So always be willing to embrace discernment. Number one, as I think, is an important thing. Don't run away from discernment. Don't be afraid of discernment, and don't think that God's not calling you to discernment. And the other thing that I want to remind people of is that although it's true that there can be obstacles to entering, right, or to joining communities or certain states of life in the church, that is true. That there can be obstacles or roadblocks to that, as would be true in any case. It's still really important to push forward because sometimes we don't know what the possibilities are until we talk to somebody, and sometimes it's only through asking questions that the other paths that are meant for us are revealed. And even though it's scary, anytime we ask big questions about what God might be calling us to, is really super scary, I know. And we take it really seriously, vocation directors. This is starting my 10th year in vocation ministry. We take it super seriously. We pray a lot. We take your lives very seriously and your questions very seriously. We don't take that lightly. We don't take that journey lightly. And so we know it's scary, and we have a lot of empathy. I have a lot of empathy for that courage that it takes to ask and to enter into that space.
Let's take a softball question. Educational debt.
Oh.
It seems like everyone these days has taken on some amount, if not a significant amount of debt for education, for their bachelor's or master's or training program or what have you. And various communities sort of have their different rules about that. And so sometimes you see people with their crowdsourcing or GoFundMe and saying, hey, I want to enter the convent and I cannot have period, zero, nothing educational debt. And so can you speak a word about that, and how do the Daughters of Charity handle that?
Right. That's always fun, not fun, right? I should have put a hashtag in front of that. Hashtag fun, not fun. So canon law says that candidates cannot be responsible for any debt. And that's sort of the key word, responsible for any debt. And that's true. A candidate in religious life cannot be responsible for any debt. And That's where all of this stuff about taking care of your debt before you become a member of a community has come into play. And that's where we see GoFundMe and all that kind of stuff happening. Or people go to the Knights of Columbus. There's all kinds of different, the Sarah Club. There's all kinds of groups that help young folks work on debt. Or people who just work hard for a few years and pay off their debt, which is not easy when it's the size of a house or something like that, right? And I would say that I want to be sensitive to that. I think college debt, I want to say this is my personal opinion, and I think not only mine, but it doesn't represent always people being irresponsible, right? I think not everybody's family can assist. I think there are legitimate reasons, even not just for tuition, for people to take out loans during college. Just going to the dentist, right? Obviously, most of our dental insurance doesn't cover those kinds of things. And there's so many reasons why young people get into debt during college. And it's not just our books and our tuition. So I just want to acknowledge that. But there are organizations like the Library Society that and the Iberian Society, I think they're called, and there are different groups that help people fundraise who've already been accepted, who help people come up with ways to pay off their debt. The National Religious Vocation Conference has like a type of scholarship that they give to new members. There are some other sort of ways that communities manage it too. They manage it the same way that the Library Society manages it, which is where they'll take on some payment of your debt for a certain amount of time. Some communities until you make your final vows, and they'll pay off your debt because they see the education that you come with as an asset and not, not as a liability, because they would have had to educate you anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so some communities handle it that way. Some communities have longer candidacy programs, so you can actually work while you're living with the sisters, and you're paying on your debt while you're doing that. The Daughters of Charity have a program that looks a little bit more like that. Um, and so most of our newer folks really can pay most of that down by the time they come. So those are the possibilities. I really want to encourage you to talk to your vocation directors. And if you're getting nowhere, call me. I will hook you up with the right people to talk to, because there are programs out there to help people. The key is, though, that they do require some kind of acceptance, or some letter from a community that says that they plan to accept you if this debt is paid. But there are people out there that want to help people enter religious life. For us, we expect to see 2 years of successful payment on your debt before we have you come and live with us and start paying on your debt. Seems reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
right? It seems reasonable. So little things like that. They're not little, they're big, but they go a long way. And so I don't know if that helps. The National Religious Vocation Conference, the Daughters Church, lots of other communities have realized that we don't want debt to be the reason why people do not discern their vocations.
Right.
And I think the Library Society feels the same way. There's other groups that feel the same way. So it should not be your obstacle.
I think it
Yeah.
relates very well to the questions about family, because I think sometimes, parents see the education piece as an investment in their child's future, and perhaps even, with the idea that, okay, this is my child. I want them to have a good future and be stable and have a good job and all of those things, the dreams that parents have, and the perhaps agenda, for lack of a better word, that parents can have at times, with and often with the best of intentions. But I think that can be another barrier, if you want to say it like that, or something that people at least have to think about.
Yeah. God bless families. I worked in education for a lot of years. We always say, parents are the first educators of children, And I think we believe in vocation ministry that for the most part, vocations are born in families. That's not 100% true, but it's mostly true. But also, families can also be a place that can be a place of confusion for vocations. Parents and other members of our family, sometimes even our closest friends, cannot help to have their own dreams for us, right? They just can't help it. So sometimes that can be a challenge. And in my experience and working with women who encounter that challenge, the first thing I want to say is this: um, parents have got to be part of your vocation discernment journey. That doesn't mean that they're always going to understand, but I have found that whatever level of transparency is possible is really important throughout the journey. Like, it's really painful to spring things on them when they least expect it. Like, that doesn't seem to work out well. It doesn't work out well. It hasn't worked out well in my experience, and I've had a few years under my belt. It doesn't work out well. Be transparent and remember that at the end of the day, your parents love you more than they even love those expectations. And what they want to see is your joy. And if you're constantly stressed out about your decision, they're going to sense that too. You know, over time, if your calling is bringing you joy, then you need to pray to God for the grace to share that joy. Because when they start to see that, they will eventually embrace it too. Now, I'm saying it in very simple terms, and this is not a simple topic, because depending on the cultural reality that we're talking about, or whatever history is within that family context, there could be all kinds of layers and layers and layers of feelings and history behind that we're all not 100% aware of, right? But parents at the end of the day still love their children above those expectations. They love them. They love you that much. And you have to find the path. And the other thing that I think is even more important than all of that, and I often tell the discerners this, is you have to kind of forgive your parents. Because sometimes it's been my experience that parents can say kind of rough things during this time of discernment and even entrance sometimes. Not because they don't mean to, but because they're having a hard time understanding this crazy decision. It's crazy.
To them,
Poverty,
it is, yeah.
chastity, where are my grandchildren? Obedience, you don't obey me, you're going to go obey these strangers? Like, I mean, you can say, you see, they don't get it. And then, and then I mean, I just totally get it. And I feel for them so much. And so you have to kind of forgive them
Because
over and over.
you're not going to be there for so and so's baptism, wedding,
That's right.
funeral. I mean, depending on where the person is on mission, what the rules are in a given community. I read that
That's
article
right.
about that former basketball player who got a chance to hug her family after 25 years of being in
Right.
Fort Claire, which is, I mean, that's a radical life. And
That's right.
you're never going to hug your mother again, because next time, 25 years, she probably will not be alive still. I mean, that is pretty intense.
Exactly. And that's part of what you're discerning, right? I mean, like, when you embrace that vocation, it's because that's how much you buy into it. Now, we also have to remember these are not new decisions. First of all, these are vocations that have been lived for centuries, right? The second thing is, like, your parents, your grandparents probably made decisions like that. I think about grandparents who left countries, or great grandparents, they left countries before before travel was easy. People who left countries when they were sure they were never going to see their parents again. People have been doing this for a long time without knowing what was going to be on the other side. It's just now we have a sense of possession, and I say that tenderly, but there is a new sense of possession. And part of that is because the world is a little frightening. And so you can see why
Right.
parents possess in a different way. You don't blame them. It's scary out there. So
Right.
give your parents a break. Give them a break.
They're
And
struggling just like we are.
and you also have the job of sending messages of joy. Like that's really important. If your parents don't sense that you're joyful about this, then it's your fault too that they're they're like freaking out about poverty, chastity, and obedience. You know, it's it's one thing to say I'm following God's will, but if you say I'm following God's will, and every time you say it, it sounds like this awful duty. I would be nervous about my kid going to. I don't have a kid, by the way, but I would be nervous about that
Right. Right.
anyway.
Yeah. Um, how awkward is it as a vocation director to say to somebody, look, this is where we are. We're not sure that this is the right fit for you. You know, for example, like somebody who loves the idea of living community, but maybe just doesn't have the skills or ability to actually thrive in a community living setting, which there may be lots of reasons for that, perhaps.
Right. There are a few things that are just very clear, and some of them are in canon law, right? And sometimes I cite that. I say, hey, canon law is very clear about things. Canon law is very clear about certain types of emotional, physical health, right? Um, and so those are things we could cite, or we're not even could, we're actually mandated to cite. Sometimes what you said is what's more true, is that maybe what they're indicating is that community life is harder. And then I can say things like, hey, there are opportunities for consecrated life that don't include community living, or that have options for not community living, like secular institutes, right? They have options for not living in community. And I can direct people to vocation directors in those communities. And because maybe they really do have this calling to consecrated life, but community living is maybe the thing that doesn't seem to fit. And people are often not aware of the possibilities or the options within the context of consecrated life. So I
Mhm.
like that part of it. I like being able to talk about what's possible in consecrated life, or what's possible in relationship to consecrated life, right? Like, so there's communities that have associate programs, or there's even movements, right? There's things like Opus Dei, or, there are movements out there that you can also direct people to, and where they really just kind of want to live their life, but they want to be more committed to something more deeply. And
So
so that's
if
also part of our job.
I'm the kind of person, let's say, for example, I mean, with nowadays, there's not as much of a stigma, although I would argue that there is some stigma about things like anxiety or depression, certain mental health things, where trauma, for example, where it used to be you could never talk about that. That's not
Hmm.
cool. Anyone who has that kind of experience is crazy. Well, now that people are more open and accepting of themselves about that and willing to speak on it, um, I wonder perhaps if we're
Hmm.
seeing more of that come up where folks are, perhaps taking medication, or they have medication and counseling that they've used in the past or currently. How does that look in a discernment setting?
So I think, first of all, I want to say that anybody who has encountered difficulty, especially in the younger stages of our life, if you have anything in your past, right? Um, like when you were younger, you went through a period of time where you had anxiety, some bout of depression. Um, that's that's almost a normal developmental stage nowadays, right? So um, I would say almost don't be afraid to talk about that, right? That's a lot of people, especially as we're younger, we just don't have the tools to handle really. I mean, we don't have hindsight, so we don't have the. We're dealing with really hard times. So usually in my role, a couple things are happening. First of all, we get professional input, right? We get professional input when it comes to these things, and there's a difference between um, people dealing with a time or an incident or going through a period of time of counseling and even treatment. That's, uh, eh, but there's a difference between a permanent diagnosis, permanent slash chronic diagnosis,
Hmm.
um, and a time of treatment. Uh, and and depending on what it is that we're talking about, the diagnosis is, right?
Because it's
So
one thing, schizophrenia and, you know,
yeah, so
other
those
disorders that
correct,
are more on the reality based issue.
right, that are definitely not compatible with community living, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and usually this is sort of the marker for, at least for when I'm in conversation. Um, if you have to have certain things in place in your life to make your treatment successful, right? You have to have certain boundaries in place. There's a routine you put into place. There's certain things in your environment that you have to be in control of. Then community life can't be compatible because living in community, that kind of throws all of that off. And there's too much that you're not able to be in control of. And in fact, it will be the opposite. It will make you unsuccessful. And so that's the charity that we have to do and say, like you don't understand, like this life will ruin that. You know, you're successful because of what what you're able to be in control of.
Right. Certain
And
foods, time schedules,
all
environment,
of that
all of
stuff. And so this life, you know, individually we don't get to do that. We don't individually get to be in control of very much at all. And so that's when I say community life is not compatible with your calling. But there are other types of consecrated life that really might be. And actually there are orders that are open to that, you know, particularly some secular institutes that I've spoken to that are actually open to that. Because they don't live in community, but where you can still take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, even. And so these are really important things to talk about. Uh, I think it's significant for people to understand how it is that they're maintaining their health. And more often than not, it has to do with what they themselves personally are able to keep in place. And you have to remember that living our life and living most of our community lifestyles, us, Lisa, you, Sister Liz, me, Sister Liz, we don't get to individually put much in place,
hmm
you know, and it could ruin the good work of a person who's made wonderful, beautiful progress and who's very successful, very productive, you know. And so we sometimes vocation directors, we can, you know, we could really hurt people's journeys because, you know, we're kind of excited about vocation potential, right? We're excited about hopefuls, and we mislead people, and we forget that we're inviting them to hurt their own journey of health. um, because we're like, well, they look so great, everything's going so great. Well, it is. And
because they're
we're
able to control
right.
a lot of pieces of their experience.
Right. And we're actually attempting to harm that somehow.
And I think, yeah, similar vein, but perhaps you might have a different answer. The person that comes and says, "Look, I have done it all. I have been there. I have XYZ. Like, there's no way that anyone would accept me because of either things that have happened to me, around me, in my environment, things I've chosen." And so I don't know if there's a blanket statement you could make, or if it has to be more nuanced, but uh, for that person, it's kind of like, well, I'm way too messed up or broken,
Hmm.
or my past is too checkered for all this.
Sure. So I think usually when people think that, first of all, often I say, you know, I'm a, I was a pretty yellow flagged candidate myself. So I was like everybody's yellow flag. Um, and so I'm not easily put off by whatever stories people want to tell me. But it's another time when I say, okay, what are the permanent consequences of your actions? Because Jesus made it very clear to us, right? That we get to start over. He told those thieves, "You're coming with me today. Check this out." Right? So if Jesus says that, then we're really not okay to not say that. But but we have to talk about what the permanent consequences are. In other words, if I've done everything, do you have children running around that you're not taking care of? Right? I mean, if does that mean you slept around and you have children running around that need to be cared for? Um, have you contracted some diseases? Do you, you know, there, tell me what the permanent consequences are of your behavior. Is there a warrant out for your arrest? Are you a felon? You know,
Are you a felon? Do you actually have to
yeah.
ask that? Do you
Oh
have
yeah.
anything
Oh,
on your
definitely.
record?
Oh yeah. No. And we do a background check and credit checks. Oh yeah. Because we assume the liability of your personhood, right? So oh yeah, we do all kinds of checks. Um, so what are the permanent consequences? Now, sometimes they're just internal, right? They're just like, I feel bad for my actions. Well, that's a good thing if you if you should be feeling bad that you hurt
Guilt,
people,
the conscience. It's a
right?
conscience, and we have one. So that's good.
Exactly. Amazing. That's all right. There are some questions we ask. You know, there are a few things that are not reversible. If somebody disclosed something that's reportable, that involved minors, um, that would be the end of our conversation.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
there are things that just kind of not only the end of the conversation would be the beginning of a new conversation with law enforcement. Um, that's that's kind of very clear right there. That kind of thing. So, but I think in general, people don't realize most of us do things that we're grateful for that there aren't permanent consequences for. Like, I'm so grateful that most of the dumb stuff I ever did not have permanent consequences, except that it broke my heart and maybe broke somebody else's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And we do live with that.
And what do you say for those who maybe still have some things they need to work on or resolve or heal from? You know, are those things that can be done in formation, or are those certain things have to be done prior to entering a formation process?
So discernment discernment is a deep process. And by the nature of it, it often it stirs up off, I find that it stirs up things that maybe we haven't faced, right? We just haven't faced in our life. Maybe we didn't even remember until we started really praying about it, or somebody started asking us questions, right? Um, so professional help, counseling, is often a part of discernment, at least in my experience. Um, it is not necessarily compatible with formation, but it is compatible with discernment. And those are two really different things, right? So, now this is my opinion, but I think it's a sound opinion. Um, it can be a real help during discernment. It can help us clear out the field. Formation is a very focused time. And it could be that you're focusing on um, these other issues that you have to address if you're going to counseling, and you're not focusing on this time of actually putting on this new identity, which is what formation is supposed to do. And so one takes away from the other. And both of those, formation or counseling, requires a lot more of yourself. So that's why they're just not compatible. I think that there are groups where they accept doing those simultaneously, and I think that's fine if they do that. It's up to them. I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. But I think for us, we have decided that discernment and counseling is is definitely compatible. They just tend to go hand in hand, um, and probably even helpful if they're done together.
Right.
Hmm.
And I think the commitment to the inner life and inner work that it takes, it's not for the faint of heart at
No,
all.
no, and you cannot make a decision, any life decision. I don't care if it's marriage. I don't care if it's to go be a missionary, a lay missionary in another country. Um, I don't care if it's a big career change, uh, or if you feel called to be a priest, brother, sister, whatever it is, you know, those are decisions that we have to make in freedom. And if when we're not free, then we don't really have a self to give. And that's why counseling, uh, therapy is just so, and those kinds of professional helps are really important. And and to remember that when we're younger, especially now, that doesn't mean we don't get professional help as we get older, because we do. But particularly when we're younger, we just don't have we haven't lived long enough to have all that hindsight to remember that I've lived through this before. Like, oh, I've done, like I often tell like eighth graders, it's your first breakup. Like you
Right.
haven't been through five of them to realize, oh, I did this before and I survived. Like it's okay. Oh, I failed the test before and I didn't die. I'm okay. You know, because so the first one feels so big and bad. And I think that's true for many events. The first one feels so big and bad, and we don't always have a tool belt ready to go. And that's where I think so much young despair comes from. You just gotta do it once or twice, and you're like, oh, and then remember. Don't forget to remember. Remember that you did it before, and you were okay. It wasn't fun, but you were okay. So I think um, that's why counseling can be so beneficial during discernment. Yes, go for it. I
And I
often recommend it.
do it. It's everyone should do it at some point.
Hmm.
What are we missing? What's the last big one that's on your mind that we haven't talked about that you would think if we don't touch on this, we would be missing out?
I love to say this sometimes, in my experience, I find that young folks, and not just young folks, I mean, when I say young, I mean younger than me, right? I'm going to be 46. So anybody younger than me is young. Um, Yay, you're young, Sister Liz. Um, Even if you can't belong to the young adult group, you're still young. Um,
Oh,
um, Sometimes I hear people say that young people aren't committed, and I say, oh no, young people are very committed, super committed, just committed to lots of things catch our heart, lots of things. Committed to this and that and this and that. Like, look at their calendars, packed, super generous, super
right.
available, all kinds of stuff, right? Like the super duper givers of something, right? And I have experienced that, this amazing generosity, honestly. So it's not, I don't believe that this obstacle, the super big thing that is missing, has to do with commitment in and of itself. And that's why they'll tell you, no, we're committed, we're connected, we're committed. It's true. But what I think is important is, are we able to be committed to one thing different than everything else?
Mm.
And that's really hard. It's hard when you're almost 46. It's hard when you're 22. It's hard when you're 30. This is hard stuff. And we really like lots of things. And the other thing is um, to believe that that all, I'm kind of laughing and thinking, people, the viewers, the listeners can't see my face, but I'm kind of laughing internally as I say this, but to believe, that God isn't calling you down a dead end street. So that big one thing that God is calling to is, remember in Jeremiah says that, his plans for you is a future of hope, right? So he's not calling you down a dead end one-way street. And even if you're afraid that the commitment to this one thing different than everything else um, is it's either you don't deserve it, you can't say yes to it, it's freaking you out, whatever, can't possibly be true. If I say yes to that, then I'm not going to be able to make all these other cool trips I really want to make. And God knows they're good.
Right.
Can't choose between all these goods. Oh my goodness, why should I do that? I don't know. Because we're called to some primary place. All of us are called to our primary place. Figure that out. Person, play, whether it's a person, a community, or a place where you're called to serve, right? I think that's the thing that we're missing, is the willingness to be primary, to be singular. And I hear of women who they get married and they still they still can't disconnect from their best closest folks, friends, family, whatever. And not that we have to disconnect, but primary. Now your spouse is your primary person. Now the community is your primary place. Primary, singular. That's the part that I think we're having a hard time breaking through that. And that's what I pray for when it's time for the women I'm working with to make that leap. That's often the threshold that we're standing there for a long time, and they just, because there's a fear of losing the people they love, because they haven't, just what you said, they haven't experienced what that relationship is on the other side yet. What's it going to be like when I don't talk to them every day? What's it going to be like when we don't hang out for every holiday? What's it going to be like? It's just going to be so different. And it's amazing. You don't know, and I can't convince you. There's no way to do that. But if you go and hang out with that community that you've been loving hanging out with, and you see how happy those sisters are, those brothers, they're not happy because they're depressed at missing people for every holiday. They've learned to love in a new way that they didn't know was waiting for them. So we have to believe that, and believe that it's waiting for you too.
I love it. What a way to end our time together. I think
sister.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Sister Lisa, for your wisdom. For anyone who's listening, please feel free to send your comments and questions. I'm sure this episode will bring up a lot of questions and maybe more questions than answers here. But we are
Sister
happy.
Liz has all the answers.
We are happy to walk with you. Wherever it is God is taking you, we will walk with you. Thank
you, sister. Thanks. God bless. This has been In the Company of Charity podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.